Going through lunch. Thanks everyone for coming. My name's Dan Kelleher. I'm VP of Engineering at Civic. I'm going to talk a little bit about identity on Web3, past, present, and future. A lot of the focus is going to be on tokens, tokenized identity. That's probably not much of a surprise, but I will talk about other things as well. I always forget to properly introduce myself and give people links that they can follow. Part of this is I really want to continue the conversation after this talk, after this conference. So please talk to me afterwards if you have opinions about identity on Web3 in general. Or if you don't catch me afterwards, then talk to me on any of those things. I will overshare now, overcompensate, because I usually forget to put up that slide and tell you more about myself than you need to know, really. So I'm from Ireland, but I live in Berlin, and I've been in the space, the crypto space / decentralized identity space. Those are actually two very different spaces for about 4.5 years. And I like dancing and listening to jazz music. But that's irrelevant. Enough about me. Let's talk about you for a minute. I think we've got enough time to go around the room. Do you want to stand up and introduce? Oh, I'm joking. God, imagine somebody trying to force you to put information about yourself public that you didn't want to put out public. But I would like you all to think a little bit about how you answer that question when people ask you it in various settings, right? Business settings, or meeting the in-laws for the first time, or going out on a date. Usually those answers are different, I guess. And Web 2 has these very convenient guided rails for allowing us to curate identity in this way, right? Our LinkedIn profile will look very different to our Instagram profile, our Facebook profile, our Tinder profile. And how does that work in Web3, right? When we take away the guide rails, when the guide rails are there for a reason, right? To make to convince us to give up our information, largely. When we take that away and say, right, you're on your own. This is you now. This is your space. This is your private key. Go have fun with it. How do we present ourselves? Okay, so I reckon there's probably one or two of you in the room that present yourselves in the same way, right? You go on a Tinder date and you talk about your NFT portfolios. Please don't do that. That's not a good strategy. That does not work. There are probably other, actually I don't know, I was going to say there are others of you in the room. I don't know if there are any of you here, because this is a kind of a community conference, but I reckon there are some people watching later on at home on YouTube that are sitting here kind of with their arms folded and their eyebrows raised and going like, what are you talking about, identity on Web3? I trade in DeFi, I have a private key, I sign my transactions, what more do you want from me? And that's a legitimate, in my view, position to take. And back when I started in the space, that's really all there was. There was no concept really of identity on Web3. There was barely a concept of Web3, to be honest. And that all went out the window with those guys, NFTs, right? Not a surprise. That really changed people's perception of Web3. It brought non-technical people, non-finance people into the space. And somehow, like it or not, people really identify with these things. It starts to form it's a new aspect of their identity. And it's not just pictures, it's the fact that they own them in some form or another. The fact that it's theirs has an influence. And it evolved, as we all know, over the last couple of years, not just to be, I own this possession of some kind, but I'm also a member of a group. I'm a member of an inside group, a member of a community, an organic community as opposed to one that is kind of curated for us and guided in the Web 2 sense. And it doesn't just stop at profile pics, of course. We have proof of attendance tokens, like the one we received for attending this conference and others. We have tokens indicating that we made charitable donations to groups that we agree with. We have tokens that represent memberships of all sorts of communities. governance tokens for DAOs, in-game items. The list is really going on and developing as we invent new things to do in the space. And they all get combined into our wallet in the form of tokens, and then we present those to other people, and that right now is the de facto way in which we represent our identity on Web3, more or less, right? There's lots of variants to that, but it's the de facto way in which we do it. In fact, the word token itself has sort of changed its definition through this process over the last couple of years. It used to be basically this address has this amount, has X amount of something, right? So it would be a reasonable question to ask, what tokens do you have and how much of them? Okay, it might be a slightly impertinent question to ask, but it makes grammatical sense anyway. Nowadays, a more common question maybe, or at least a question that makes grammatical sense is, what does this token represent? And so the word token now means something more like this property X, can be associated with this individual or entity. And that's, if you think about it, that's quite a huge shift. And they're often, by the way, these soul-bound tokens or non-transferable tokens. I know we don't all love the term soul-bound. If you don't like it, just pretend I'm saying something else when I say it, because I might accidentally say it a few times. There you go. But you know what I'm getting at. And they are effectively the de facto standard, like I said. And we know that there are risks, right, with this sort of pattern. There are concerns about privacy, about which issuers do you trust, what happens if they disappear. Does that centralize control in a handful of issuers? Interoperability and so on. Another important one is how do you keep your data, well, I guess one of the most important ones is how do you keep data private but still share it publicly with trusted counterparties that you choose? Is it an all or nothing? Is it I keep this data completely private, or I make it available to the outside world, the entire outside world? And another issue with tokens is largely, or not largely, but frequently, this choice is taken away from us, right? We get tokens pushed to our wallet. Right, let me stop for a second. I want to talk a bit about Civic. So Civic, as I said, we've been in the space for, actually before I started, we've been in the space for 5 or 6 years. And again, as I mentioned, when we started, there was no real concept of a Web3 identity. So we focused on, but we were actually issuing KYC tokens on Bitcoin back in the day, of all places. If you went through a KYC process with Civic in 2017, there's an attestation to that on Bitcoin. And at that point, we were offering a self-sovereign KYC service to non-blockchain companies who were looking to provide a more secure, a more privacy-conscious KYC solution to their customers. But as the space has developed, we are now moved towards providing an identity layer or identity primitives and products for Web3. We still believe in issuing tokens, by the way. I'll get to that in a moment, because although there are lots of concerns about it, there are also lots of benefits to it. One of the products that we're releasing this summer, it's kind of in alpha mode right now. It works on Solana. Some features work on Ethereum too, but there's more Ethereum features coming in the coming months, is Civic Me. It's essentially an identity portal where you can combine aspects of your identity from multiple chains. That means NFTs. That means passes that I'll get to in a second. And it also means personal data that you want to store and share with others on a permission basis. And another product that we have been working on, and we have had live in production on a couple of chains for the last year, is Civic Pass. Civic Pass is that SBT token platform that I was telling you about. And okay, I hope you like metaphors, because there's a metaphor coming. I like to think of civic pass as like sunscreen for SBTs. Okay, this metaphor worked a lot better about 2 days ago. Imagine it's super hot outside. We all love going out in the sun, right? It's a nice place to be. It's fun. It's attractive to go outside and just play, right? But if you don't wear sunscreen, you're going to get burnt, and you might not get burnt, or you might not feel the damage immediately. It may take several years before the damage accumulates. Sunscreen for SBTs means that we provide built into the system protection against the worst components of issuing tokens associated with someone's identity, while still gaining the benefits, the playing in the sun bit, of having tokens in the first place. Before I go into the mechanisms by which we protect our users, I want to talk a little bit about some of the benefits, or one particular benefit, which is why we do it in the first place. As I said, tokens are the de facto way in which we represent identity at the moment on-chain. And one of the benefits of that is that it makes them super easy to integrate into smart contracts. So smart contracts can cheaply evaluate if a token exists in your wallet. There are mechanisms using zero-knowledge proof and attestations as well, but they don't solve all the problems. We can get to that maybe offline. But essentially, if smart contracts across multiple chains can check simply if you have a token associated with your wallet. We have Civic Pass integrated into DeFi protocols that want to protect against or restrict access to only members of non-OFAC sanctioned countries and people who are not on OFAC sanctions lists in order to attract market makers who would otherwise be unwilling or unable to take part. And we've seen how regulation is coming into the DeFi space. Sometimes it's coming super ham-fistedly. Having primitives like that in the space already is a good way of convincing lawmakers that there are solutions to the concerns that they have already built in. They just need to be adhered to. We also have Civic Pass integrated into NFT platforms, both for tokenized ownership of real-world assets and for bot resistance. And finally, we also have Civic Pass integrated into governance platforms to provide Sybil resistance and proof of humanity. How do we do it safely? Well, we've based the design of Civic Pass on a number of core principles or best practices. I'll go through them relatively briefly now. The first is privacy, right? This is the main one that we're concerned about. The more you issue tokenized passes, the more proof of attendance tokens you accumulate in your wallet, the more information you're giving up inadvertently, and you can't take it back. There's no right to be forgotten here. It's there forever. If it starts happening widely, then there's a kind of a snowball effect. We issue only very high-level access control passes that are merely representations on chain that you have a particular verifiable credential. For those who don't know, a verifiable credential is essentially a set of claims that are issued from a trusted issuer to a subject, and those claims are signed by the issuer. They are then held by the subject so that they can be shared to anyone that they want. And that's necessary because in a lot of cases, third parties require this information for regulatory purposes. They definitely don't need and don't want to have that information on chain. All they need on chain is something that the smart contract can check to make sure it exists. If that pass exists, the user can transact. If it doesn't, they can't. They don't need to see anything more than that. There's a temptation, the naive approach would be take all the claims, stick them all on chain, right? I'm over 18, put an over 18 claim up there. I'm under 19, I didn't get that one, but if I were under 19, put that one under there. You see how it snowballs. Right? That's a design principle in Civic Pass not to do that. The other sorts of passes we issue are similar. They are simply representations on chain of a verifiable credential or some fact about the user that doesn't give away any personal information. Interoperability. So we believe that, and I think a lot of us believe that the future in Web3 is multi-chain. We're either talking about L1s and L2s, or we're talking about non-EVM chains, which may require you to have then different key material, different wallets, and we believe that Civic Pass is designed to allow these passes that are issued on chain 1 to be transferred trustlessly to other chains. And we use DIDs to connect people's identities across multiple chains into one unified identity. Another aspect of that is pluralism of identity, the ability to keep your personas separate if you so choose, just like you might choose to have different representations of your personality on Web 2 platforms like LinkedIn and Tinder. So too must that be possible, and it's even more possible on Web 3. And finally, an important one is decentralization. You remember a few slides back I mentioned about how do we trust the issuers, who are the issuers, and what happens if they disappear. So when we talk to smart contract developers and teams that are building DeFi applications, they have the sensible question, well, does that mean if Civic goes away or Civic changes its mind about what it wants to do that our smart contract doesn't work anymore? And so, no, we built that into the protocol as well. So the protocol is, the Civic Pass product is based on the identity.com gateway protocol. And in the gateway protocol, there's this concept of a network. So a network is essentially a DAO-like self-governing structure of issuers that agree to issue passes based on a set of common rules. And the protocol is designed such that a pass issued by one issuer in the network is treated equivalently to a pass issued by another. So when you integrate your smart contract with Civic Pass, you're actually integrating with a gateway protocol network, and that can have multiple issuers in it. We're interested in integrating with issuers on Ethereum, by the way, and in smart contract developers on Ethereum. We're currently on a couple of chains, but not yet on Ethereum. We've built the groundwork, but we want to do the last mile with some customers or some integrators, so please catch up with me on that as well. But that decentralization, I think, is a huge difference to typical kind of NFT voting or other similar sort of voting mechanisms or gating mechanisms that are just, if you have a token issued by this address, then you're allowed to get in. If you don't, then you're out of luck. And we want to make this more open, and I find that this network pattern as well creates a nice seam, a proxy between the fully trustless, decentralized smart contract component and the issuer component that inherently requires a certain amount of trust. This network builds the trust, and then you trust the network. But there's so much changing, I really don't want to leave the conversation there. I'm going to finish up now, but please get in touch. I've got so many opinions and thoughts about how the space should be and how the space could be, and I'd love to get involved with discussions with you all, and maybe you might have some questions now as well. Thanks very much.
Hi, great talk. The interoperability aspect, how do you guard against other issuers using the same gateway protocol as you from sort of influencing your civic ID, your civic identity profile?
So if you're saying using the same gateway network, you mean issuers joining a network that they haven't been accepted into?
No, so you're saying that the decentralization aspect is if Civic folds, then that protocol that you're using is interoperable with other ones, right?
Yes.
How does Civic guard against that same network being used to sort of influence your Civic ID?
Yeah, so we're developing that aspect as kind of a bootstrapping side of things, but it's envisioned to be essentially a DAO. So there will be a number of constraints or requirements that an issuer would need to meet in order to be accepted into the network. And once they're in, there will be constraints and requirements that they will need to meet year on year to stay there. We've also in the white paper for the gateway protocol, there's a staking mechanism that will slash stake if too many passes that they issue are revoked. But the network sees the consumers, the smart contracts see just the network. You can check which actual issuer, Civic or anyone else, is behind the pass, but they just see the pass and the network associated with it.
So at the moment, it is possible that someone else on the same network can almost influence on the reading reading the protocol level your ID.
They can issue a pass against your identity, yes, against your decentralized identity.
Yeah.
And so it's up to the DAO that's running the network to ensure that no bad actors join.
Okay.
But what it doesn't what it doesn't look like is that this pass comes from Civic. This pass will come from some other issuer that is on the same network.
And from the user's perspective, it's possible to check that it is from Civic.
Yes.
So you're filtering it for your system, you're doing only from Civic. That is
yes,
possible.
Exactly.
Cool. Thanks.
How are you thinking about the difference between certificates and quality or ranking? So there's like, okay, I went to a university, and then there's I got these grades, or I was the number one person. So how are you? Because a certificate is just saying you did graduate.
It's a good question. So the simple answer is that if there's any kind of quality or sub-data, I guess, involved in the credential, then you pass that to the third party, the relying party, off-chain. That's a peer-to-peer communication between me and the organization that's interested. Now, if there's a smart contract that says, I'm only going to accept people who got summa cum laude or higher in a particular university, we would personally be very concerned about representing that on-chain. Now, that doesn't preclude other people from doing it, and at the end of the day, it's a personal choice matter. We have some protocols that allow you to derive passes from other passes in a trustless way. So you can basically go, here's a basic pass, here's some additional information, here's a more specialized pass. So we do allow for people to do that, refine their tokens, so to speak, but I, for one, don't love that pattern because, for the same reasons, it just leads you back into the same pattern as before. It might be something that, some of these things like a university degree is a prestige factor. So if you have a first or a summa cum laude or something, you'd want to present it, and there's probably nothing particularly wrong with that. But if you're forced to, because the issuer issues everything at once, then that's a huge problem.
I guess the other question I would ask is also about the certification of the validators themselves, right? So you're getting a verifiable credential, but the credential issuer's reputation, like whatever, the name of the college, for example, like, oh, is this a good issuer or a bad issuer? Is that also something you're thinking about?
We are thinking about it. We're not building many tools for it right now, but we have an open source wing, like I said, identity.com, and they're always accepting submissions and proposals and suggestions. It is a common concern or a common question across the entire decentralized identity space. And there are interesting proposals such as, again, staking reputation in order to at least guarantee to some extent the reputation behind it. Obviously, you could also, you have DIDs that have certificates, PKI certificates on them. So you can say this issuer owns, I don't know, harvard.gov or whatever they have, edu, or something like that. It's a hybrid between the fully Web3 approach and the PKI approach, which is, in my view, a totally reasonable one. I think we're done, are we? All right. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a nice lunch.